Welcome back everyone, Oz here. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Ask Reddit. 911 dispatchers of Reddit. What's the most interesting reason someone called 911? I've told the full story before, but the short version is that a lady called 911 to ask if we were the people that dealt with the elephants. I told her that we were, and she proceeded to inform me that there was an elephant in her room. Usually it was a really nice elephant, but tonight it had a gleam in its eye and she was concerned. Dementia is a funny thing sometimes. She just wanted someone to address the elephant in the room. My dad is the dispatcher. Got a call once from someone completely out of their mind, barely able to articulate themselves. Kept screaming, but he could make out that there was an unresponsive woman. Nothing more. Following his training and the guidelines, he made the guy calm down a bit, check for a pulse, and when there was none, told him to do CPR. You learn ways to persuade people who are in shock to just follow your orders, and so the guy did as well. When his colleagues arrived, my dad learned what was up with that woman. He had practically forced the poor guy to do CPR on his beheaded wife. Please give us info, we need closure. She didn't make it. You had me in the first half, I'm not gonna lie. Jesus Christ. It's really difficult to answer questions like this because you get so many calls. They all just blur together, and to be honest, a lot of them are really weird. Like, a lot. After a while you get so many calls that are screaming word salad from schizophrenics, or angry rambling drunks, or paranoid dementia patients, or crazy violence, or weird injuries and medical conditions, etc. that your definition of what makes an interesting call changes a lot from what most people would find interesting. But to actually answer your question, I guess the lady who wanted to report her boyfriend for domestic violence because he made the chili too spicy on purpose and he knows I have this shit. True, of all of those things, nothing phases you anymore over time. An interesting one I got was a guy calling early morning with a question. He was trying to be healthy and got into making breakfast shakes, but he still didn't like the taste of them. So he went on, made a shake in the blender with fruits and greens, pinched his nose and drunk it down. Except he forgot to take the little plastic forky thing out of the container with the fruits. So he had blended that as well and swallowed it. Interesting, because it was a first for me and we weren't all that sure if it could be harmful or not. I have a friend who's working on his way to becoming an officer. One day he was at the station when he comes across a police report of responding to a 911 call from a 6-year-old boy. Reason? He didn't want to share his candy. My friend works dispatch and I asked her this a few months ago. She said there's a couple that complains at least once a month that someone is shooting pornography through their window via some sort of projector, and whenever the cops come, it's not there anymore. No one knows if it's actually happening or not. Just to be clear, the couple is saying that there's someone sneaking up to beam porn through their windows. Yes. In the past 2 weeks, I've seen 2 funny calls come out from dispatch. The first was a dangerous animal call. A white poodle named Charlie was humping children and it was disturbing. The second was a woman calling and saying the FBI was in her trash. The third, but it disappeared from pending. It said a woman was having issues with Michael Jordan, Idris Elba, and another person, but I can't remember the name. If I were having issues with Idris Elba, I certainly wouldn't be calling 911. What straight woman or gay man wouldn't want to have issues with Idris Elba? Dispatcher here. We get way too many calls to recall every one. Even the interesting ones tend to blend together. The 2 that stick out in my mind this week were the couple who called us because they were being followed by a pit bull in a sweater and that it could be aggressive. He ended up being very sweet and very lost. The other was an elderly gentleman who became very angry because his neighbor was parking in front of his house, legally, on a public street. He became incensed with me when I told him it wasn't against the law. He was less happy when the 2 officers showed up with a summons for misuse of 911. He got a second one for disorderly conduct by the end of their visit. We tend to get a lot of calls from people with mental health issues, but the one that sticks out in my mind was a gentleman who would call daily to update us on President Obama's transition to a lizard person, while Michelle Obama was the real Barack. He was a daily caller and kept in touch until he tried to burn down an apartment building and was sent to a facility with no phone access. Cop here. Lady called 911 because she and her husband were moving a sofa in their house. through the front door and it got stuck. Wouldn't go back out or any further in. Due to the risk of getting sued if we damaged the sofa or the door in the process of trying to help them, we let them know that we couldn't help. An officer did get on the radio and asked if they had tried pivoting the sofa. Pivot? Shut up, shut up, shut up! As a 5-year-old, I called to tell them my caterpillar had died. They did come. My parents apologized, but the cops insisted they would look at my caterpillar. Upon further inspection, they told me that it was just a chrysalis, and it would be a butterfly soon. It was the most beautiful butterfly. I called 911 once because I was scared of a noise outside my house and didn't want to investigate alone. I just wanted someone on the phone while I went and couldn't call anyone at 3 a.m. That's pretty legit. I almost called 911 once because someone was breathing heavily right behind me, and I was on a couch next to a big picture window, so next to me was outside looking in. I slid off the couch and was about to go to the phone before I had a cell when I realized it was my cat snoring from behind the couch. I almost had a heart attack, all because of a lazy kitty. For the sake of contributing interesting stories relevant to the post, I'll share what my dispatcher buddy told me about. The poop in the pocket guy. This man would frequently call in and was masturbating to the voice of the dispatcher. Ugh. He would ask what they were wearing and such. Sometimes he would come into the station and it was found out he kept solid toilet paper in his pocket to sniff at his leisure. Some people become around at very weird things. The bondage guy. They got a call from a concerned person who saw someone in the park that looked dangerous. They show up and find a guy in full gimp gear, complete with a ball gag. Not sure what he was doing walking around the park, but it turns out he was an off-duty cop from the precinct over. And for the saddest, the city has a lot of iron gates with sharp points on it. They would be called frequently in the fall to respond to deer who had impaled themselves on the fence. Jesus Christ. It was considered too risky to shoot them in the middle of a city, so they would just have to let them die on the fence. Holy fuck. Someone's lizard was stuck in their printer. My mom was a dispatcher. Her favorite was a lady that called to ask, "How you be getting rid of ringworm?" A few of my favorites. The gentleman who called wanting to show us the pot plant, it was poison ivy, he had found behind the fishing hole. Who, when we asked him his name, he told us he was the One-Eyed Bandit, and his blood type was beer, and his rambling days were done. Same guy called a few months later after he drunkenly tried to attack his mother-in-law and she whooped his ass with an umbrella. Animal calls are always fun too. We've had a lady call in telling us there was a group of deer on the side of the road and she thought that they were up to no good and we needed to remove them. Or the pack of dogs that didn't read the road closed sign and went down the road anyways even though it was closed. Or the lady who freaked out when she called about rats in her apartment and rhetorically asked out loud, how could they have gotten in? I stupidly responded with, well, they probably came in through the walls. She did not like this at all and promptly had a panic attack on the phone with me. The list goes on, and most of the really good ones are NSFW, so I'm not sure if I can tell them here, but the amount of stupid out there is really terrifying. Not a dispatcher, but my dad runs 911. Had a guy call once because he was shaking his leg and his foot fell off. Straight shit. He was diabetic. I called the police accidentally thinking it was my dad's work number. I was 5 and wanted to snitch on my brother. It was his birthday and he got a tennis racket and he jokingly was chasing my mom around the house, hitting her with it, being annoying. This was the first phone call I ever made and it went a bit like this from what I can remember. Operator. 999, what's your emergency? Or something like that. Daddy, can you come home quick? John's hitting mom with a tennis racket. Can you confirm your address? No, lady, just put my dad on or tell him to come home. Then hung up. Went and had a nice lunch out that day and came home to 4 police officers at the house asking about domestic violence reported by a young girl. Mom gives mortified look in my direction. Woman called to say she'd been on FaceTime with a man that showed her the bodies of 2 people he killed. She was calling from another state and wasn't sure where exactly he was. Spent a lot of time getting as much information from her as possible, convinced myself that this is nuts and there's no way he actually showed her dead bodies. Came into work the next day and the bodies had been discovered and an arrest was made. One guy called to ask for toilet paper. He rang back saying, "Never mind, I found some bread." This guy caught his adult son kissing his wife, stepmom to the son. Oh, also the deli line was too long. I was a dispatcher for a few years. One of the more memorable calls was an older woman who said her granddaughter borrowed her car and parked it somewhere, but they couldn't find it. Police looked out for the car for 3 days and she called several times a day to get updates. She was pretty convincing and blamed her granddaughter for being irresponsible and into drugs. I called the number back to let her know we weren't able to find her car and a nurse answered. It was a nursing home and the woman didn't own a car. Another was a guy who had purchased drugs from someone he suspected drugged his dogs and wanted to report it. Happens more often than you would think that people call to report something about the drugs they purchased or the prostitute they hired. Newspaper reporter, not a 911 dispatcher, but one time I heard this call over the scanner. Dispatch called one of the cops and said a woman called in saying she was doing some home remodeling work and accidentally broke a pipe in her apartment, which caused her apartment to start flooding. The cop actually said, "What does she expect us to do?" Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing, or if you want to see more of my AskReddit content, then click on the playlist on the end screen here, or maybe you want to see some other stuff like my r/Tinder video, or maybe you want to see some reading stuff that I do, like the r/entitled parent stuff that's super popular right now. Anyways, thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.